Today we'll discuss the Bournewood case, HL versus UK. This is the case that eventually led to the creation of the Mental Capacity Act of 2005. Back in 1997, an autistic man in his late 40s was admitted to hospital following an episode of self-harm. The man, who we know as HL, was unable to communicate with care workers, and so he couldn't consent. So a best interest decision was made to admit him under common law. The justification for this is the common law doctrine of necessity, a legal principle that allows care workers and others to intervene in emergency situations where another person lacks the capacity to consent. For example, an unconscious person with breathing problems found lying in the street can be taken to hospital without consent because they're unable to give it. The paramedics who transported that person would be seen to be acting in their best interests, doing what most reasonable people would consider to be reasonable at the time. Similarly, common law allows hospital workers to admit people in emergency situations, but it doesn't allow them to detain that individual over time without seeking formal legal authority, for example, under the Mental Health Act. This is important. This means that it's unlawful to prevent people from leaving a hospital or a care home without formal legal authority. The implication of this for countless people in care homes, hospitals, surgeries throughout the UK are very far-reaching indeed. The problem in Bournewood wasn't really with the initial admission, although that has been criticised. It was the lack of legal authority for what happened next that mattered so much. HL was not allowed to leave the hospital, nor were his care workers allowed access to him. And yet, because he was not detained under the Mental Health Act, this meant that he had no right of appeal. The European Court of Human Rights called this sort of de facto detention unlawful. Bear in mind, it takes a unanimous agreement of all European member states to change the Convention rights. It's way beyond the authority of any single doctor, social worker, nurse, or other care worker. Common law admission in emergency situations is acceptable. Continued detention without legal backing is not. The interface between common law, civil rights, liberty, duty of care, and the law concerning capacity has been a source of great confusion for the health and social care culture for decades. So, as a result of the Bournewood case, we got the Mental Capacity Act 2005 to clear up the confusion. Let's consider a more common scenario in the UK. I was in a residential care home not that long ago, training the staff on the Mental Capacity Act when we got to the section covering locked doors. This is important as it outlines the rules about when doors can be locked and how to work with them legally. The manager of the care home was there for the session and she said, "It's all right, Stuart, you can skip this bit. It's not relevant for us." Well, this surprised me. So I asked how the law relating to locked doors could possibly be irrelevant to a residential care home. "Our residents don't go out," she replied. "Why not?" says I. "Because the doors are locked," was the reply. The manager seemed surprised when I asked her why the doors were locked, and so she helpfully explained, because they're old. Remember the point I made about needing legal authorization to deprive a person of liberty? So far as I am aware, growing old is not a crime, and it doesn't warrant imprisonment. No court in the land would convict someone for being elderly, nor is learning disability a crime. All UK citizens have the same basic civil rights. These are legal entitlements. This is why nobody can prevent you from leaving your home when you want to. The human rights you have will not change simply because you've got older. Nor will they be taken away should you change your address. The residents in this care home, it's not unique by the way, had simply grown old and changed address. They have not given up their right to liberty. The Mental Capacity Act 2005 sets out the circumstances in which we can restrict an individual's liberty if they lack capacity to make their own decisions. But that's all. We need outside authorization to deprive a person of liberty. All rights and freedoms are liberties. They include the freedom to do things, to make choices, for example, and they include freedom from things like assault or other forms of abuse or exploitation. In short, every choice you make for yourself is an expression of your right to decide. Your service users have the same rights unless there's a legally justifiable reason to restrict them. Different situations require different responses, but don't worry, it's not so hard to understand if you get the basic principle about the three types of situation in your head first. The three types of legal status. Most people can make their own decisions. These are people whose capacity to make decisions is not in doubt. That's one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, we have the Mental Health Act. That covers people who, because of a mental disorder, are deemed to present a risk to themselves, a risk to others, or they're at risk through self-neglect. Bridging the gap between the two, the Bournewood gap, we have the Mental Capacity Act. This is for people who are not detained under the Mental Health Act, but who lack the capacity to make the decision. Every decision we face today involving service users, residents, patients or clients will fall into one of these three categories. It's important to be clear about which category is which because it affects the whole legal situation. When you're messing about with rights, you're messing about with a legal situation. To misquote the Bible, the law giveth, the law taketh away. Every UK citizen has the same basic rights in law unless the law removes them. The law will allow us to restrict a person's liberty in their own best interests only if they lack the capacity to make the decision at this time. The restriction is proportionate in the circumstances. The restriction is in that person's best interests, not the best interests of the staff, the relative, anyone else. Also remember that a person's legal status changes depending upon the situation under consideration. For example, George knows what he wants for tea. He's most people. He doesn't understand what to do about his will. He's in the Bournewood gap. George is suicidal. He'll be cared for under the Mental Health Act. As you can see, the difference isn't to do with a change in George so much as a change in the way we view the situation. George could at the same moment be detained in a psychiatric hospital because of his suicidal behaviour, need Mental Capacity Act assistance to sort out his will, and be perfectly capable of sorting out what to eat from the hospital menu. The reason that issues of capacity seem so confusing is because people often fail to understand this concept. Nobody has capacity for every decision. Just try deciding how to solve the problem of global conflict and you'll see what I mean. Almost everybody has capacity to decide something, even if it's just that they feel cold. It is unlawful to decide that any conscious person lacks the capacity to make all decisions. Even if they're unconscious, we must consider the likelihood of that person regaining capacity, consciousness, and making their own decisions before we jump in. The rest of this series will focus upon helping workers to find the balance between the rights of their service users to make decisions, their duty of care, and the legal responsibilities we all have to take reasonable steps to protect vulnerable people from harm. I'm Stuart Sorensen. You can find me at www.mindthecaretraining.com. If you found this video helpful or useful in any way, please feel free to share it around, and while you're at it, if you click on the little character icon in the centre of your screen right now, you can subscribe to the channel. It would really mean a lot to me if you did, and be very, very helpful. Thank you very much.